I'm Murray Stein, and I'm here to introduce you to the ZLS Zurich Lecture Series speaker for 2021, Professor Roderick Main. First, let me just say a word about the Zurich Lecture Series and what its purpose and mission is. Going to be shown on the screen. The Zurich Lecture Series was established in 2009 for the purpose of presenting annually a significant new work by a selected Jungian psychoanalyst or scholar who has previously offered innovative contributions to the field of analytical psychology. For the series, the selected lecturer typically will deliver over a 2-day period, several lectures based on a previously unpublished book-length work, which is then published by Chiron Publications. So you can see that the purpose of the Zurich Lecture Series is to bring analytical psychology into meaningful dialogue with other scientific, artistic, and academic disciplines, show how analytical psychology can lead to a better understanding of contemporary global concerns, and expanding the concepts of analytical psychology as they are applied clinically. In 2021, Professor Roderick Main is going to present lectures on the topic of the undoing of disenchantment, mystery, metaphysics, and meaning in the work of C.G. Jung. I want to introduce Dr. Roderick Main to this audience by asking you, Roderick, to say a few words about yourself personally. How did you come to the position that you have today at Essex University and the kind of interests that you will be exploring and presenting during your lectures in Zurich next year?
Okay, thank you, Murray. Well, I mean, I've been at Essex, University of Essex, where I work, in the Department of Psychosocial and Psychoanalytic Studies for about 20 years now. And I moved there after completing my PhD at Lancaster University, which was on synchronicity as a form of spiritual experience. And I'd come to study that after initially studying classics at the University of Oxford, and afterwards getting interested and involved in a whole range of sort of psychical research, parapsychology, sort of areas, esoteric areas as well. So I sort of came to Essex just at the point when they were setting up the Jungian studies program there. And got involved with that, and it had a very, I mean, it was a sort of, I feel very fortunate to have landed that position, as it were, because it sort of now enabled me to carry on with the interests I've got within a context where, an academic context. And yet I could carry on being interested in the sort of offbeat topics in Jungian thought that I had.
How did you get to those interests? What drew you to those?
To the interests?
Yeah, to the interests, yeah.
Well, I mean, this does relate, I suppose, to the subject matter of my presentations, my lectures. I mean, when I initially went to Oxford, I studied classics. I was very sort of disaffected, I have to say, with the kind of my experience of the education. It was very high quality education and so on, but there was something that I felt was not being addressed, certain areas of interest. It was very, as I experienced it or as I perceived it, it was very sort of focused on certain kinds of achievement and career objectives and this sort of thing, and questions. Although we were studying profound literature and philosophy and so on, it didn't seem to be engaging with what those topics were really about, but more with the sort of instrumental use of education to get yourself established in the world. Of course, nothing at all wrong with that, but I felt there was something missing. Yes. In fact, after a year of it, I did leave. I quit my studies and went off to study magic and esoteric topics, sort of privately, and to write poetry and so on. And I did that for a couple of years, but didn't really make the kind of headway I wanted in either area. So I eventually returned to academia to complete my studies. But there was this.
What brought you to magic? Why magic?
Well, because I suppose. There was an allure to this idea that I'd had certain sorts of inner experiences of, I suppose, what would be called out-of-body experiences and lucid dreams and this sort of thing, which gave me a sense that there was some inner reality or whatever. I hadn't initially. Perhaps I had encountered Jung's thought a little bit, but not very much at all at that point. So this was a sort of a way of feeding that interest, I suppose.
Did you in a religious context, in a religious home? Or?
No, not at all. No. It was. I was brought up in a sort of Protestant background, but very, sort of on the edge of real sort of any religious commitment. There was no real religious commitment in me. I sort of rebelled against it when I was young, and so I was quite post-religious in a sense. And
I see.
Yeah.
You're going to lecture about disenchantment. That's what you experienced at Oxford, it sounds like.
Yeah, that was So my whole academic career really has been my choice of PhD topic, and this. And what I've been teaching since at Essex has all been very much about trying to strike a balance between the value of genuine academic research and work, which I do value and which I think is very important, but also attending to a sense of mystery, a sense of something that's challenging the sort of worldview, I suppose, that results in disenchantment.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
disenchantment.
But yeah. Literally, disenchantment is is loss of magic, or a sense of a loss of mystery, and it's often associated with a sort of sense of loss of a sense of the sacred and of a sense of reconciliation between self and world and so on. But actually, the term became well known as a result of a lecture which Max Weber, the sort of founding social scientist, gave in 1917, just at the time when Jung was sort of emerging from his Red Book experience. And in Weber's lecture, Science as a Vocation, he talks about certain sort of conditions, as it were, which characterize modernity, one of which, he talks about intellectualization, rationalization, and disenchantment. And disenchantment is really the result of the sort of intellectualization. And you can pick out from his essay certain features, and these are going to form the sort of some of the chapters of my book and some of the lectures that I'll be giving. So one of the sort of features is the idea that there's this loss of mystery, that everything we need to know or can know, we can gain by empiricism and reason as applied by science as it was understood in the sort of late 19th, early 20th century. So one of my chapters will be on Jung's concept of Jung's ideas about mystery, and his exploration of phenomena which baffle the science of his day and still of our day. The whole wide range of paranormal and mystical experiences that he had himself throughout his life, that he studied in depth throughout his life, and he published numerous books on, and so on, and that he heard about also from his patients and so on.
Was Jung a mystic?
Was he a mystic? Well, he had mystical experiences, and I think his 1944 near-death experience and the sort of unitive experience he had there is absolutely a classic mystical experience. I mean, phenomenologically, it tallies with what you find in the literature on mysticism. Whether he was a mystic in the sense of, that being his primary sort of orientation and so on, I mean, that's a debatable thing. He was many other things. He was a sort of a human being who engaged in the mundane as well as the mystical and so on. So but certainly there was a very, very important mystical trait, and I think I would think, if one thinks of his culminating work, Mysterium Conjunctionis, and its conclusion, it's basically a theorization of the sorts of things he experienced in his near-death experience, So it was very important to him.
Mm-hmm. And do you think Jungian psychology has a role to play in re-enchanting the world? That term is sometimes used, re-enchantment.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it does. Yes, I would say so. I've used that term myself. In this series of lectures and book, I've used a different expression, undoing of disenchantment, because I wanted to highlight that the disenchantment itself is not as it sometimes presents itself, a condition that is what's left over once you get rid of all the illusions, once you strip away all the false beliefs and everything. The disenchanted view is what's left over. Disenchantment itself, I think, is something that has been constructed culturally over many centuries, and has its roots in certain ways of seeing the world, in certain metaphysical views, which is what I'll be addressing in one of my chapters, the chapter on metaphysics. But to get back to your question about whether analytical psychology has something to offer, I think it does. I mean, I think Jung's whole work, and this is really the sort of premise of my book and my talks, I think his whole work is really an attempt to engage with the condition of disenchantment, that sense of the loss of mystery, the loss of any connection, any interaction with anything that transcends the empirical world, with the divine or the spiritual, and there's the lack of the absence of meaning from the world. I think Jung, in a sense, is addressing each of those questions in a whole range of his work, and perhaps his whole oeuvre really is an attempt to address those issues, not I would say straightforwardly. I mean, Jung himself, his own work is in some ways could be aligned with disenchanting currents. I mean, when you're talking about removing projections, you're disenchanting. So it's by no means straightforward. And Jung, as I'm going to argue that Jung has an implicit metaphysical position and theological position, which supports, if you want, a re-enchanted or a more enchanted view than a disenchanted one. But Jung, of course, famously and clamorously was sort of resisted being categorized as a metaphysician of any sort. But I think one can kind of resist, one can challenge him on that point, I think.
Let me ask you, does Roderick Maine have a mission to re-enchant the world?
Well, I wouldn't. A mission is perhaps a bit too strong. I mean, I have a little project which starts, for myself to re-enchant my own world.
The subject of synchronicity. Is synchronicity a part of finding some sort of ultimate meaning that's not created by humans within the structure of the world?
Well, I think that is implicit in what Jung says about synchronicity. His concept of synchronicity really is, I suppose, the epitome of his attempt to address the problem of disenchantment. I mean, the talks I'll give and the book I'm writing won't be into, synchronicity won't necessarily be foregrounded, but it certainly underpins a lot of what I'll be saying. Synchronicity is the concept he developed to try and make sense of these mysterious phenomena. It can only really be understood, I think, in terms of a metaphysics of the kind that I'll try to elaborate. And in relation to meaning, it is precisely a principle of acausal connection through meaning. So he's affirming in a way that is very unpopular and is intellectually very unpopular that meaning is something that is not just a human construction. Not just a human construction. It's not that he's saying that the human doesn't contribute to what we experience as meaning, but but he thinks there is something inherent, if you like, in reality that when we engage it is experienced as meaning, and that and it's something that can be.
And you've written quite a lot about synchronicity. This book that you've written for the Zurich lecture series, has that taken you into some new territories? How has it affected you writing this book?
Well, I think there are two main ways that it might have affected me. One is that it's helped to bring together a lot of thinking I've been doing over the last couple of decades, really. I've been writing about disenchantment. I've been writing about these different areas that I'm going to relate to disenchantment, Jung's attempts to sort of address the problem of disenchantment. And writing this book is a sort of an opportunity to synthesize them and to find the connections amongst them. So things I've been writing about, like synchronicity, but and paranormal experiences, like what Jung's implicit metaphysics might be, the problem of meaning, and holism, and so on, are all going to come together in this book in some way. So it's certainly been very useful from that point of view for me as a way of forcing me to see the connections amongst all my interests. So it's been quite an integrative process for me in that sense. It's also been quite a challenging process, I have to say as well, in the sense that the nature of the book and the lectures and so on, I don't want it to be as sort of scholarly in the sense of as targeted at a purely scholarly readership as some of my other work is. So I'm trying to communicate my ideas in a more accessible way, shall we say? And to me, that's a challenge.
Yes, and I'm sure you'll be successful in that. We're hoping to be able to stage the Zurich lecture series in Zurich as we usually do. We don't know what the situation with the coronavirus pandemic will be by the fall of 2021, when the Zurich lecture series are scheduled on the first weekend of October. But at any event, the lectures will take place one way or another, either on site or online. And I'm certainly hoping we can do it on site and online, a combination, so we'll have a wider audience as well as the audience in Zurich. I hear you saying that this book is a kind of summary of the work you've been doing for the past 20 years. Are you seeing this as a staging for future work that you have in mind? Do you have any intuitions where this might be going in the future? You're still a young man. You've got a long career ahead of you.
Oh, yeah, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I mean, I do have other projects lined up for afterwards. But they're in analogous territory, if you like. I mean, I'm going to be doing something on Jung and Pauli afterwards. Yeah. So I mean, there are lots of areas within that I'll be touching on. I'll be sort of in the book. I'll be sort of summarizing, as you say, much of what I've been thinking so far. But I see most of the areas as being sort of opening up questions. More questions arise than are resolved, for sure. And it's really just preliminary work in a way. I mean, I see all of what I've been doing is preliminary work. So I think there is a lot more work to be done in the kind of areas that I'll be talking about, and probably I'll be sort of just digging a little bit deeper in some of those areas insofar as time and circumstances allow, and my own capacities.
And I think you'll probably find some collaborators along the way, people from other areas, perhaps from the sciences even. That Jung-Pauli collaboration is very interesting between psychology and quantum physics. I think that has been carried a few steps further by some thinkers and researchers in the past few years. And maybe you'll find some way also of connecting to other areas in the sciences, social sciences, and broadening influence and discussion of analytical psychology into other territories.
Yeah. Well, I hope that's the case in relation to the sciences, but also in relation to the humanities. I mean, I know that there is good relationships between Jungian thought and the humanities in certain areas, but I think in a sense, the potential for Jungian thought in the humanities is also quite enormous, and even these areas of synchronicity and so on are have a lot to offer. I mean, one thing I was recently working on was a sort of looking at poetry in relation to synchronicity, and almost poetry almost as a form of applied synchronicity, in certain ways. So I think there's a lot of interesting connections with the humanities, and there's also a great need to foster work, I think, in the humanities, which are sort of underserved by the current sort of university systems, which tend to invest its energy and its money in STEM subjects, and so I'm hoping to have some relationship also with the humanities and with my work.
Yes, I think the concept of the university is under some stress these days, isn't it? I mean, what is a university, and what is its function in society and in culture?
Yeah.
And I think introducing some of these themes that you're proposing would enliven the work that's being done in universities.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, this is what I don't think I communicated very well at the beginning, but I feel my whole sort of engagement with academia has had this tension within it. That there is something, as you put it, that the academy, modern academy, is very much one of the drivers of disenchantment, and it's very difficult to find a place for certain subject matter, certain interests within it. And I've been very lucky in the sense that I've managed to, smuggle my interests in and keep them alive, keep them burning a little bit. But it is difficult to keep that sort of momentum going. But I think that there are signs that there are quite a few people that one encounters who are managing to explore things that are a little bit more enlivening, I would say, in academic context. And there's a bit of there are certainly some possibilities there. and I feel much more comfortable in my university now than I have done in the past. That may be my own fantasies, but certainly, within the discipline of psychosocial and psychoanalytic studies, there's the space to engage in some of these things, which are phenomena of the human psyche and so on.
Well, that's very much appreciated by students. I know at a number of students from ISAP have studied at Essex. Others are now studying at Essex. So this combination of the academic and the practical that the Jung Institutes and training programs offer, I think is very valuable in our world. So I want to applaud the work that you're doing there and the position that you've arrived at there of seniority, and you have influence. Students work with you and come to your university because you're there and what you represent. So I think you're doing a great service.
Well, it's a great opportunity and a privilege, actually, because students come with the most interesting projects and backgrounds and really committed, and from ISAP as there have been many and are currently some, and the combination of, as you say, the combination of the sorts of psychotherapeutic insight and background and the commitment to doing something academically rigorous with that, results, I think, in very interesting work.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to your lectures here at ISAP in the fall, and hope that the pandemic will have subsided by then so we can have you here, and I hope entertain you well as you teach us and we learn from you. Thank you, Roderick. We look forward to our further connections.
Okay, thank you very much, Murray. I look forward to it myself. Yeah.
Thank you.